All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tolson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shemar Drashos this year as a schus for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Haba Alinu Latova, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, and thanks to Hashem for all of his nisim, both the revealed and the hidden, for the miracle of Yonatan Shai Weinberg 14 years ago, for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and the merit of the speedy arrival of Mashiach. Daniel and Batsheva Pava of Eretz Yisrael, commission of the second yahrzeit of Batsheva's father, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vei Zichron Livracha. Our day of learning sponsors, Sherry and Alan Steinmetz, in honor of Alan's father's 90th birthday. Mazel Tov, and for brachas for many more years and good health, and the schos Emeretz Hashem for all of us to be able to continue to learn together for many years to come. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Baruch and Bracha Rivkin, commission of the yahrzeit of Libby Rivkin, Liba Bas Shaul Halevi Zichron Livracha. And today's Daf Yomi sponsor, Beryl and Rachel Golkin, in memory of Beryl's grandmother, Fega Bas Avigdar Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, all the families in Nechama, all those in the Refuah should have one together with Kol Chole Yisrael. Hashem, bring home our hostages, b'shalom and b'karav, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yedeim. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, a really great daf ahead of us today. As I put in the WhatsApp chat, we've got remedies, inspiration, halacha, hashkafa. We're going to laugh, we're going to cry. We're going to do everything in Eretz Hashem together. And we are going to begin. Today's daf is Chof Tes in Eretz Hashem. And we are beginning on Chof Ches Amud Beis 828b. 18 lines up from the bottom. So if you remember again, I kind of left off just about 2 lines shy of the end of the Irek Gemara with the remedies. I was so close. But the Gemara, so we just ran out of time. The Elo, and if you cannot partake, actually the last word of the line. Now we're 17 lines up from the bottom. The Elo, Laisi Guvsa de Kanya Sig. I actually read this. But then we ran out of time. If you don't have any of the previously aforementioned remedies, and I will say, by the way, I want to thank all of the Chevra. I got a lot of messages yesterday. I think the first message was from Gary Goodman in Silver Spring, right? Who Baruch Hashem was pointing out some of the dental issues that the Gemara was discussing, which was great. I'm actually going to try to compile it and share it. There's a lot of not helpful information, but there was a tremendous amount of helpful information that came in, which was actually quite fascinating to see how perhaps some of the items that were mentioned in the Gemara are actually like legitimate diseases for which we understand today. So again, I'll try to compile it. A lot came in, it was great. But we'll try to compile it and send it tomorrow or send it today. V'ilo, and if you don't have access to the previously mentioned remedies, so the Gemara says, take a hollowed out reed, a very old reed, that is a reed, literally a reed tube, that is over 100 years old. And then go ahead, grind it up. Go ahead and, or I should say, fill it with salt, rock salt, burn it, and apply the paste in your ear. Okay, and the way to remember all of these remedies is retiva liyaveshta v'yaveshta l'retiva. So remember again, the ear ailments essentially manifest themselves in one of 2 ways. Either that the ear canal dries out, or there's excessive moisture in the ear canal. So the Gemara just says, you use the dry remedies for ear moisture and the moist remedies for ear dryness. Amar Rabbi Barazucha, and I will say, by the way, remember, these things are very important because as we're going to see, a lot of these, I guess what we'll call them homeopathic, herbal remedies, if you used the wrong one, it was actually detrimental. So that's why these mnemonics of remembering which one goes to which are actually incredibly important. Amar Rabbi Barazucha, Amar Rabbi Malin Aznayim b'Shabbos. You can go ahead and literally again raise ears, lift the ears on Shabbos. Now, what does this mean? If you take a look at Rashi, this is Rashi on the first wide line. Malin Aznayim, Gide Aznayim. So literally again, the sinews of the ear, Pamim shiyardin lamata umisparkim halechayim v'tzarach lalosam v'yesh sakana b'davar. So sometimes the ear itself could become dislocated, and Rashi points out over here that when the ear becomes dislocated, it could have a negative impact on the jaw, and this could actually be a shtikol sakanas nefashos. So therefore, again, the halacha is you're allowed to readjust, realign the ear on Shabbos. Tanir Shol Bar Yehuda biyad. So that you could do it manually. So you could do manual manipulation of the ear in order to put it back in place. Avalo b'sam, but you can't use medicine. Again, why can't you use medicine? Because B'pashtos Rashi says, since there is a way to take care of this problem with physical manipulation, we'd rather you not use medicine. Because remember, any use of medicine is always going to be an infringement of the rabbinic decree of medicine on Shabbos. So Gemara says, my taima. So what's the reason for that? Mazrif zarif. I'm sorry. Others say, Bisam. No, you could use medicine. Avalo biyad. Yudafka should not use physical manipulation. Why not? My taima, Mizraf zarif. Rashi says over here, Ose chabura v'yesh chel Shabbos yoser. So interestingly enough, it's worse to use your hand because using a hand can create a wound. Now, also interestingly enough, creating a wound on Shabbos is also problematic. It's a told of the malacha of shchita. So what we have, and that could be a potential daraisa. So essentially, the Gemara says it's so much better to go ahead and utilize, or I should say, infringe upon the rabbinic prohibition of medication than the potential biblical prohibition of causing a wound. Okay, so machlokes. So the Gemara says as follows: Amrav Zutra Bar Tuvia Amrav. Ayin shemarda. So we'll say now we're moving on. So that was ear stuff. So in other words, that's the end of the ear sugya. Now the Gemara talks about eye ailments. So it's interesting. It calls ayin shemarda. So if you have it literally translated, an eye that rebelled. Now what does this mean? Rashi says, third wide line in shemarda sherotze lotzeis ki adam hamori diyotze. So literally again, it's an eye that's like popping out of the socket. Now lav dafka like physically popping out of the socket, but we're going to see what they're more describing over here is an intense pressure, probably behind the eye. So again, that's ayin shemar. So you have this literally eye that's rebelling, intense eye pressure, intense eye pain. What's the halacha? Mutar l'kochla b'Shabbos. You're allowed to go ahead and apply. Now, we'll say interesting enough, l'kochla could either mean to like apply eye makeup or to apply some type of eye ointment. Really, in this context, obviously it means to apply eye ointment. So you could apply some type of medication. Savamine. So we assumed over here, this is assuming that you made the eye ointment yesterday, Erev Shabbos, right? So you don't have to actually make the eye ointment on Shabbos itself, because obviously making an ointment on Shabbos is going to be a potential prohibition of schika saman and grinding up herbs, which is the malacha d'oraisa of schika, or of tochein, of grinding. So but to grind up the herbs for an eye ailment and then to transport that remedy, even let's say through a public domain, b'pashtos would be aser. Would be aser. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yaakov Shmei. So one of the rabbis, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov, said to Rav Zotra, L'didi mifarshtem minei Rav Yehuda, Afilu mishchak b'Shabbos v'asui derech shesra b'motar. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, you're even allowed to make this eye remedy on Shabbos itself, and if needed, you could even transport it across the public domain, which is another way of saying what? That an eye ailment is sakanas nefashos. It's mortal danger. It's mortal danger. And because it's mortal danger, even if you have to actually make the ailment on Shabbos, even if you have to transport it on Shabbos, you are allowed to do so. Rav Yehuda shar the michal ina b'Shabbos. Now the Gemara quotes this. Rav Yehuda allowed someone who was suffering from an eye ailment to make the remedy on Shabbos. Amar lahu Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda man tzayis liYehuda machil shavi. So Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, obviously different Rav Yehuda, went ahead and got a little bit hot under the collar. He said, "Whoa, who allowed Rav Yehuda to be machal Shabbos?" So very, very strong words, right? So who allowed Rabbi Yehuda to be Machal Shabbos? In other words, who says you have a right to make this remedy? L'sof chash be'enei. Then Rav Shmuel himself was afflicted by an eye ailment. Shalach le, he sent to Rabbi Yehuda, shari o aser. Is it permitted or is it aser to make this eye medication? Shalach le, l'kul is great. L'kul alma shari l'didach aser. For the rest of the world, it's mutter. For you, it's aser. You're very from. You're very firm. Obviously, you're firmer than the rest of the world. So everyone else is permitted, but for you, you're not allowed to do it. So Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'chi midi dehud." Right? Do you think I made this up myself that you're allowed to make the eye ointment on Shabbos? The Mar Shmuel he. This is actually based on a psak of Mar Shmuel. The Mar Shmuel paskin that halacha l'maisa, you can make an eye ointment on Shabbos itself and even transport it across Rosh Hashanah if necessary. The Gemara tells a story. Ha'i amsa the Havi Bey Mar Shmuel. There was a particular maidservant who was in the household of Mar Shmuel. The kat chale'ena b'shabsa, and she was having eye issues on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Savcha v'leka da'ashkach ba. She was complaining, but no one listened to her. No one listened to her. The Gemara says, Paka Eine, her eye, literally means again, her eye exploded. Now, what it doesn't have to literally mean an explosion. What it means is that she suffered some type of irreparable eye damage. L'machar, so we'll say, so what happened? Everyone realized that they did not take her complaints seriously, but her complaints were absolutely legitimate. As a result, the Gemara says, L'machar nafak Mar Shmuel v'darish ayin shemarda mutal kachla b'Shabbos. So I'll say the next day, Mar Shmuel, after realizing how severe an eye ailment could be, got up and taught in public that you're allowed to actively treat an eye ailment on Shabbos. And I will say, by the way, now what treating it means as follows. It means obviously the application of the medication, but it means even if you need to make that medication on Shabbos, and even if you need to transport that medication on Shabbos, because of Shirabim, an eye ailment is always considered to be sakanas nefashos. Always considered to be mortal danger. The Gemara says, now why is that? My time, why is an eye ailment considered to be mortal danger? So we'll say this is actually quite a fascinating statement. The Gemara says, Dishuraini de'ena bu'uvnasa deliba talu. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, the Gemara says, because somehow eyesight is connected to the muscles of the heart. That's the literal translation. Eyesight is connected to the muscles of the heart. Now Rashi says over here something interesting. Rashi says, what was it? Man says the macho shavi the mashmul melekilasa. No. Yeah, Tosfos has it also, but there was a Rashi, I thought. Where is it? Sorry, it's in the Haki Garcina, right? Thank you. So it's 2, 4. It's not very masculine. It's 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom, like the middle of the line. The Haki Garcina is here. That is Mutal Kochla B'Shabbos. My timer Shuraini Deina Bu'uvnasa Deliba Talu. So literally, Rashi understands literally that eyesight itself is connected or is dependent on the muscles of the heart. So Rashi understands this literally to mean that somehow there is some type of physiological connection between the heart and the eyes. Now Tosfos has a little bit of a different approach. Tosfos says, Perish HaKatab Tosfos, Perish HaKuntras, Ma'or ha'ayin tali b'taraf shi deliba, v'li nira be'uvnisa deliba talu, kolomar, re'iyas ha'ayin talui b'havanas halev. So interestingly enough, whereas Rashi understands this to literally mean like a physiological connection, that eyesight itself is connected to the actual muscles of the heart, Tosfos seems to understand this idea that the ocular capacity of the eye is fundamentally dependent on the understanding of the heart. Okay? Point over here is the Gemara is making some type of connection between the eye and the heart. That there's a connection over here. Therefore, impacted eyesight will ultimately again have a negative impact on the heart. And therefore, it's interesting. It's not that the eye itself is sakanas nefashos, but the heart is obviously sakanas nefashos, and therefore anything that impacts the heart will by definition be mortal danger. But we'll say either way, whether it's according to Rashi that it's literal, like physiological, I should say physiological, or Tosfos, that it's a little bit more almost like I don't know if Tosfos is saying a spiritual idea, or Tosfos is saying, no, that literally, again, it's not physiological, but there is this connection between the heart and the eye. It's clear, we'll say, we know, Tosfos is v'lo sasuru. There is definitely a connection between the eyes and the heart. Like Rashi HaKadosh says on that pasuk, Ha'ayin roeh the eye sees, v'halev chomed, and ultimately, again, the heart desires. So what's incredible is, at least on a ruchnius level, there is this tremendous connection between the heart and the eyes. The eyes see, and this is why, again, we know one of our greatest struggles is shmiras einayim, being careful with what we look at. And even though, again, it's easy to justify that I'm just looking, I'm not doing anything, there's no physical inappropriate act, but we all know how it works, that once I see something that I'm not supposed to see, then that fundamentally changes not only, again, what I'm looking at, but it physically changes my internal composition as well. I am a different person internally. Ultimately, again, I'm a different person internally after I see things that I'm not supposed to see. The eyesight is fundamentally connected to the heart. Incredible. So Mar says, Kagon Mai. Ultimately, again, so what's an example of some of these maladies, right? So how do these eye maladies manifest themselves? So the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Kagon Rira, Ditza, Dama, Dimasa, Kidcha. So the Gemara says, for example, if there's water, moisture, right? 3 years like moisture. Ditza, Rashi says over here, Neitza Tchiva, stabbing pain. Dama, redness of the eye, blood inside. Dimasa, teariness. Kidcha, Rashi says again, inflammation. Trilas ochla. Rashi says, now betrilas acholi, right? All of this ultimately, again, is the beginning of the illness. La fuke sofa ochla. Now again, upetzuche eina delo. Now when are you allowed to treat eye ailments on Shabbos? Only if it's the beginning of the eye ailment, not if it's the end. In other words, if the eye disease has already run its course, let it run its course. If it's at its tail end, you can't treat it on Shabbos. And furthermore, under no circumstances can you treat things only if they impact eyesight. Now, how exactly one would know what's an eye ailment that's only impacting eyesight versus what's an eye ailment that could affect the heart? Not immediately clear from the Gemara, but you wouldn't be able to treat an eyesight ailment. I will say, just so you should know, halacha l'maisa, the way we paskin, Shmir Shabbos Kilchus actually discusses this, and he says any eye ailment is always considered to be sakanas nefashos. It's fascinating. That's how we paskin. So someone has an eye issue on Shabbos, obviously he's not talking about pink eye, right? Or he's not talking about, just irritation that you need like Visine for. But halacha l'maisa, anything that is considered to be a substantive eye ailment is in fact considered to be sakanas nefashos. It's interesting. The Gemara goes weiter. Amar Yehuda, Zibura, if you get a bee sting, right? The Gemara says, Udechazre silu, or again, if you get a scratch by a thorn, Visamta de le'ena, or a blister, ultimately, again, that's bothering the eye, Va'asi iluya ishta, and ultimately, as a result of these injuries, you now have a fever. The Gemara says, Kulu be bani sakanti, right? Ultimately, again, sakanta. All of these are considered to be the beginning, ultimately, again, of sakana, which I will say sounds like over here that the result of the fever is probably referring to what? Probably referring to some type of infection as a result of these things. Quite interesting. So the Gemara says, so what do? Chama l'chama, v'silka l'tzina, v'chilufa sakanta. So again, we'll see this in greater depth, but ultimately, again, you use warm remedies to heat overheating of the body, and cold remedies to treat chills. Okay? But if you mess up the remedies, if you use the wrong remedies for the wrong ailment, ultimately it could cause a person tremendous sakana. So the Gemara says, Chamimi la'akrava, v'kariri lezibura. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes different things work. For example, for a scorpion bite, you use a warm compress. For a hornet sting, for a bee sting, you use a cold compress. V'chilufa sakanta. But ultimately, if you mess it up, if you switch the remedies, it's a sakana. L'silu, the Gemara says, v'chilufa sakanta. Chamimi l'silu, you use a hot compress for a thorn, if you're cut by a thorn. V'kariri, top of chavtes, l'chas benisa. And you use ultimately, again, a cold compress, ultimately, again, for cuts on your face. V'chilufa sakanta. And the opposite causes sakana. Chala l'siburi. Ultimately, again, you use vinegar. Rashi says, again, siburi is hakazas damik safayim. If you do bloodletting from between your shoulders, so ultimately, again, you use vinegar to heal you after that. Umonini l'ta'anisa. and ultimately, again, small fish. If after a person fasted, they are weak, you use small fish to combat post-fast weakness. And the opposite, ultimately, again, will cause sakana. Tachli visibura sakanta. So ultimately, again, use eating cress after bloodletting is sakana. Ishta visibura sakanta. Going ahead and having fever and bloodletting while you have fever ultimately is sakana. Ke'ev eina visibure sakanta. If you have an eye ache, right, and bloodletting, ultimately again it's sakana. So we've seen this before. In other words, from the perspective of Chazal, bloodletting always weakened the person. So essentially what you see over here is if you have any other pre-existing condition, pre-existing medical ailment, bloodletting is going to cause you additional problems. Sheni ledag dam. 2 days after eating fish, you could do bloodletting. This is interesting. After you ate fish, you should not do any bloodletting for 2 days. Second day or 2 days after fish, you're allowed to bloodlet. Sheni ledam dog. 2 days after bloodletting, it's also healthy to eat fish. Shlishi lo sakanta. Third day after bloodletting, eating fish, that's a sakana. Okay? Tanrabanan. So Chazal taught, Hamak is dam lo yochal chag bash. If a person does bloodletting, he shouldn't eat the following foods. What shouldn't he eat? So it's a chag bash as a mnemonic. Lo chalav, no milk. Lo gvina, no cheese. Lo bitzalim, no onions. Lo shchalai, not cress. Now, what happens? Obviously, these items further weaken you. Im achal, what happens if you did eat them? What should you do? So the Gemara says, Im achal, amrabaye naisi revi'isi dechala or revi'isi dechamra v'narvinu b'hadei adadis. What you should do is take a revi'is of vinegar, a revi'is of wine, mix them together, v'nishte, and drink it. Now, both say that it's clear what this will work as is some type of diuretic. This is going to clean out your system from whatever you just ate. The Gemara just gives a piece of advice. When you defecate, only defecate towards the east of the city so that the wind doesn't carry the odor. Apparently, again, it's very odorous. And therefore, again, defecate in a way that the wind doesn't carry the odor. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel Levi, Malin unkali b'Shabbos. You can go ahead and be Ma'ale unkali. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? So the Gemara says, Amrav Abba is istumcha. Now what's istumcha? Istumcha daliba. Rashi says, Dofne basar shetachas halev v'hi tarfasha. So apparently, again, Rabbi say this is some type of dislocation of the muscle around the heart. So the Gemara says you're allowed to go ahead. I guess there was some way that they knew how to physically manipulate this from the outside of the body. You're allowed to manipulate this cardiac muscle on Shabbos. Now Rashi gives another gear. So he says, Lishna achrina tnuch shekeneged halev shekorid nivla upamim shenichfaf litzat panu ma'akeves hanashima. So others say it's a lobe opposite the heart that would impact breathing. The idea either way is you're allowed to take care of this because somehow this impacts breathing. Okay, so the physicians will message me what exactly this is. But Lamais, you're allowed to go ahead and manipulate this on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Maya Susa, what's the remedy? Maisi kamona kurios. So you go ahead and you bring a ladleful ultimately again of, actually really Rashi says, Kimuna Kuruya, Rashi's Ke'en Kaf Egrof, a fistful, right? A fistful of cumin, vanina, and mint, va'agada. So these are different types of grasses, different types of herbs. Rashi says, Esev Mar, it's a bitter herb, vitzisri, va'avdasa. And you do all of that, you mix all these things together. Laliba, and ultimately, again, the Gemara says, if you have a heart ailment, in general, how else can you treat it? The chamra. So it's interesting. Either you can make this whole concoction, or just drink wine. The Gemara says, V'simarech, how do you know that wine is good for all heart issues? V'yayin yisamach levav enosh. Wine gladdens the heart. L'ravcha, or l'rucha, I should say, if you have breathing issues, right? So what should you use for breathing issues? B'maya. Ultimately, again, you should use water. Drink water. Simanich, what's the simon for this? V'rachalokim merachefes al pneim. I will say, it's so beautiful. The Gemara's understanding over here is embedded in Tanakh are the other properties of these items. So yayin the samach lavav enosh, the Gemara understands is not just a statement about the effects of wine that it makes you happy, but literally, again, wine can have curative effects on the heart as well. That literally, again, the ruach, right, breath, the Gemara's understanding of breath, is enhanced or helped by water. Incredible. The Gemara says, Lukuda, Rashi says it's fascinating. Lukuda, Cholish Isha Yoledes Umitztanenes ala Mashber. If a woman is having chills in labor, she's having a difficult labor, what should you do? Shikra, this is great. Give her a beer. Give her a beer. Chevra who are in this parsha, in the hospital bag, you put a six-pack in there, right? You never know. For you, for her, whoever it's going to help, right? But Lamais, it's incredible. A woman is in the throes of labor. What should you do? Offer her a beer. Now, you might want to run after you offer her a beer, right? But Lamais, offer a beer. V'simanach v'kada al shichma. So this is great. This is incredible. This is by Rivka Imenu, by the whole in Chai Sarah, by the whole episode of Eliezer. So literally, it says she's going out to draw water. Vikada al shechma, the jug is on her shoulder. The Gemara is using a bit of fan words like kad could also be that a receptacle for beer, and it's al shechma, it's on her shoulder, meaning at the time that she's giving birth. Incredible. Rav Acha Rava shachik lekula bahadi adadi. So Rav Acha Rava took all of these aforementioned remedies, these items, not the ingredients. He ground them up and he put them all together. He took a fistful of it and he drank it. Rav Ashi shachik kol, and this is talking about again for the heart ailment. So Rav Ashi shachik kol chad v'chad l'chudei v'shakil malo etzba asei rabasi umalo etzba asei zotrasi. So Rav Ashi, when he would make this concoction, make this medicinal remedy, he wouldn't take a handful of all of the herbs. Instead, what he would do is he would take what we call literally again a pinch. Now it's interesting how does the Gemara describe it? Malay etzba'asi rabasi umalo etzba'asi zutrasi. So literally again a little bit of the big finger, a little bit of the small finger. In other words, a little bit of each. Amra Papa. Papa says, Avdi l'kol hani v'lo istoi. I tried all of these things for the heart ailment, and it did not work for me. Until this Arab merchant went ahead and told me, I see kuza chadet. So here's what you do. Get a new jug. Maili maya, fill it up with water. V'rami bei tarvada de duvsha, and put in it a spoonful of honey. The talile bei kochvi. That was underneath the stars. That was Rashi says, Tachas hakochav b'chaz rabbi. So in other words, take a spoonful of honey that was out overnight underneath the stars. Ulamachar ishti. And then the next day, drink it. Avdi hachi. So our Papa says, I did this day, and I was healed. Incredible. Tarabanan. Shisha devar meraped esachola mechalyo v'refu'asan refu'ah. There are 6 things, Rabbi say, that are always good to heal a person from their ailments, and this is a bona fide remedy. Here's what they are. Number 1, ve'elohein, kruv, cabbage, tradin, beets, me'sisin yevesha. Me'sisin yevesha. So me'sisin, this is an herb, right? The liquid, or say a mixture of water with this dried herb, this me'sisin. Kibas is the stomach of an animal. Right, the stomach of the animal, again, I guess, has certain curative enzymes that are good for medicinal purposes. Vaharas, or the uterus of an animal. The oseres hakaved. The oseres hakaved says the diaphragm. So again, these are parts of the animal that ultimately, again, I guess, have curative enzymes that are helpful. Yesh omrim, others say, af dogim kitanim. Small fish also have curative powers. By the way, it's also good because small fish are also good for fertility, right? They enhance fertility. So the Gemara says, and furthermore, mafrin, that's perivarivia, right? Fertility. Umar bin kol gufo shel adam. In general, they're good for general health. Good for small fish. Asar dvar machzirin esachola lechalyav v'chalyav kasha. There are 10 things, Rabbi say, which if you eat them, and let's say you're ill, they will prevent you from recovering, and the relapse will cause even a more severe form of your illness. In other words, they're not good for you. Ve'eluhein. But Bepashtas, it sounds like they're not good for you if you're already ill. What are these items? Eluhein, ha'ochel basar shor shuman, fatty ox meat, basar tzli, roasted meat, basar tziporim, the meat of birds. So obviously, again, this is why you have to understand, it's talking about somebody who's already ill. right? And maybe even recovering a little bit. If you eat this, it's going to throw you back into the throes of illness. Basar tziporim, so bird meat. Beitzot sluya, a roasted egg. Shchalim, cress. Taglachas, shaving. Okay, not food, right? Shaving, the act of shaving. So apparently, again, if you're recovering from illness, shaving will set you back. Merchatz, the bathhouse. Now, both say, now I don't know the shaving piece, but the bathhouse seems to be just like the heat. It could cause an overheating of the body. Merchatz, gvina, cheese, the kaved, liver. V'yesh omrim, others say, af egozim, even nuts. V'yesh omrim, af kishuin. Some say also cucumbers. So these are things ultimately, I will say that if a person is recovering from illness, don't eat these items until you're fully recovered, because if you do, they could cause you to have a relapse. So the Gemara says, by the way, about cucumbers, Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, lama nikra shman kishuin. Why in general, why are cucumbers called kishuin? The Gemara says, mipnei she'ein kashin l'chol gufo shel adam kecharavos. Ultimately, again, because they are literally as harmful for the body like swords. So apparently, again, in general, kishuin word considered to be a very healthy food item, but certainly for someone who's recovering from illness. Rabosai, shkoyach. You have essentially completed the medical course of Talmudica. Right? Incredible. It was like as we spoke about yesterday. First of all, again, just to highlight two important points. Number one, this what Chazal are sharing with us is what was the conventionally held and understood ideas. Although it is fascinating sometimes when Chazal bring psukim to back up the ideas that they are espousing. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I will say the most important thing that when we come to these sugyas is never to be disparaging. Because one of the interesting things that happens in the realm of human knowledge is that how often in life, like we come back to things that were said a long time ago that we thought we were so much smarter, and yet when we come back to basics, we understand the profundity in the statements of yesteryear. So again, as we spoke about before, we're not going to utilize these remedies, but lamaisa, we never know the wisdom that's embedded on a deeper level. And number three is, as we ended off yesterday's shir with, we sometimes wonder, what are we doing learning Gemaras like this? What are we doing learning Gemaras like this? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us so. This is where we get to exercise our obedience muscle. And the obedience muscle, which is sometimes the hardest one to flex and the hardest one to cultivate, is the one that says, do it because you're supposed to do it. Not do it because I enjoy it, not do it because it makes sense, not do it because it makes me feel inspired, but do it because a Yid learns Torah. Why does a Yid show up at 5:45 in the morning, every single morning? Why? Because I have to, because I'm supposed to, because it's the right thing to do. Why do I learn these dapim of Gemara? Because the Ribbon Shalom told me I have a spiritual mandate to make my way through Shas. Some days inspire, some days don't. Some days make sense, some days don't. The job of a soldier is to report for duty, whether he likes the orders or doesn't like the orders. And when we go through a daf like this, it gives us this tremendous opportunity to cultivate and ultimately to flex this obedience muscle. Okay, now let's say back to Avoda Zara. So the Gemara says as follows, says the Gemara, Ve'ein mistarem mechol makom. So remember again in our Mishnah, we had a machlokes ultimately again about getting a haircut from an akum. So remember again, this was a machlokes in the Mishnah. Mishnah feels like a million years ago, right? But it was just a few days ago, right? So the Mishnah said, no, wrong Mishnah. The Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa ve'in mistar mechol makom. The Rameir says you are never allowed to get a haircut from an akum. Again, Rameir's logic was that halacha l'maisa sakanas nafashos. It's mortal danger. The akum could slit your throat. Chas v'shalom. Chacham said in Rishus Harabim it's mutter, but not beino lebeino, but not in private. Right? Rishus Harabim is mutter because the akum is not going to do anything, right, in public, right? But lamaisa, not in private. Okay, so it says the Gemara. Let's analyze. Tan Rabbanon Yisrael hamistarem ovigochavim roe b'mara. It's very interesting. If you are getting a haircut from an akum, you should make sure to ask him for a mirror and look at yourself in a mirror the whole time. Now Rashi points out over here, why is that? So Rashi says something very beautiful. Rashi says, because if the akum sees you looking in a mirror, he's going to think that you're someone important, right? Why? Because I need to know how I look. I'm interacting with government officials, right? I'm having meetings, I'm having different things. So because of that the akum thinks I'm someone important, therefore, halacha l'maaseh, the akum is not going to harm me. They always kochavim amstapra mi Yisrael, and if a Jew is giving a non-Jew a haircut, an akum a haircut, kevin sheigir lebluriso shomet es yado. We'll say again, all roads lead back to the ponytail, right? The bluris. So if I'm giving an akum a haircut, I can't go ahead and do anything with his bluris, right? Since again the bluris, the ponytail, was a form of idol worship. Therefore, again, I can't cut it, I can't trim it, I can't groom it, I can't curl it, I can't do anything with it. A Jewish barber cannot be involved, bless you, with the bluris of an akum. So Rabbi Shmuel what's the case, right? What's the case when we say that if a Jew is getting a haircut from an akum, he should make sure to look in a mirror the whole time? What is the case? If the akum is giving me a haircut in Rosh Hashanah, lama limara, then why do I need a haircut? Why do I need a mirror? Because remember again, anyway, according to the Rabbanon, it's mutar Rosh Hashanah. And if he's giving me a haircut in private, my hobby, what good is a mirror going to do me? I'm in danger. The olam b'rishos hayachid. Gemara really is Rosh Hashanah. Gemara says v'chivan diika mara mischaze adam chashuv. And I will say, and what? And because I'm using a mirror. And then because I'm using a mirror, therefore what? I look like an important person. It's interesting, right? I guess like a regular guy, he gets a haircut. You know, that's it. But Adam Chashuv wants to make sure he looks right. So therefore, if I'm in Rishus HaYachid, which really I shouldn't be, right, with a non-Jewish bar, but if I am, at least if I ask for a mirror, he's going to think I'm someone important. And as a result, he's not going to come to harm me. So I will say there is a tremendous Mosar Haskel in this, which is ultimately, again, often the way you view yourself is the way the world will view you. In other words, what the Gemara is saying over here is something fascinating. If you act as an Adam Chashav, now in this case, the guy's just acting as Adam Chashav, but if you act as an Adam Chashav, if you hold yourself out to be an important person, the world will view you in that way. The way you view yourself is often the way the world comes to view you. What's the makar for that? The makar for that is the Meraglim. Remember again, the famous statement of the Meraglim is the Meraglim say, when speaking about their reconnaissance mission, right? They say, Kichagovim, right? V'chin hayinu be'eneihem. We were like grasshoppers in their eyes. Now, why is that? Because since the Meraglim looked at themselves as little, therefore, again, they assumed that's how the world viewed them as well. They both say this is so incredibly important. When I have low self-esteem, right, when I don't feel good about myself, I project those feelings onto the world around me. I assume no one else likes me. I assume no one else is behind me. I assume if I don't like me, the world doesn't like me. But if I could get comfortable in my own skin, if I could be self-assured, if I could be confident, again, knowing all of my faults and my failures and my frailties, I'm not talking about a self-delusion, but if I could get comfortable in myself and be happy with me, the world will see me in that way as well. If I could view myself as an Adam Chashuv, the world will view me in that way as well. So many problems, Rabbi said, that often we have with our interactions with others. If we're honest, some of the difficulties in our interactions come because we're not happy with ourselves. I'm not in a good place. I don't like me. I'm not happy with me. A self-confident, happy, well-adjusted person is able to get along and interact with almost anyone. How you feel about yourself is the way the world is going to feel about you. Incredible. So Rav Huna bar Bizna Rav Huna bar Bizna was getting a haircut from an akum. So Bishuli din Arda, in the alleyways of Narda, Amar le Chana Chana Yoi Koech Lazugas. This is great. The barber in the middle of the haircut says to Rav Chana, Chana, be careful, your throat is getting too close to my razor. Right? So now again, it's not something you want to hear, right? Two things you don't want to hear from the barber. Right? That's number one, right? And number two, your throat is getting too close to my razor. Okay. So Gemara says, Amar tisili da'avdi ad Rameir. So Chana says, I deserve this because I violated the words of Rameir. Right? In other words, that I'm getting a haircut from an akum. Gemara says, 1 second. He also violated the words of the Rabbanon. Right? Because even the Rabbanon hold, you can only get a haircut from an akum where? In Rosh Hashanah. But Rav Chana was in the alleyways, which is Rosh Hashanah. To which the Gemara says, Rabbanon Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah mi Amar, v'hu savar shili din arda, kevin the shlichi berabim, ki Rosh Hashanah. No, in that respect, Rav Chana thought that the Alois of Narda had the status of Rosh Hashanah. So he thought he was actually, according to the Rabbanan, he thought he was actually good because he was getting a haircut again in the public thoroughfare, right? But Lamaisa, he made a mistake. Okay, so Mar goes weiter. The Brisa said, if a Jewish barber is giving a haircut to an akum, once he gets close to his bluris, he can't go ahead and cut his hair. So obviously the shaila is, how close is close? V'kama, how close can you get to the bluris? So you need to be 3 finger breadths away in every direction from the bluris. Right? Which, if you think about it, essentially sounds like it pretty much refers to the entirety of the back of the head. Right? So Lamaisa, you can't cut anywhere 3 finger breadths in every direction of the bluris. Okay? Amr of Chanina, Braid Rav Ika. So remember again, it's interesting. I just want to point out, whenever we quote Rav Malkia, the Gemara always has this same conversation. So Rav Chanina, Braid Rav Ika says, Shipud, Shvachas, V'gumos, Rav Malkio. So these 3 cases, which we're not going to get into, of Shipud, which is the spit after meat is roasted on it. Shvachas, which is the case of a woman who has maid servants. What does she have to do? What are her domestic responsibilities in marriage? Gumos, which is when you find pores that could have contained pubic hairs, but you don't find the pubic hairs themselves. What's the impact on that? So all of those statements, all those halachas were made by Rav Malkio. Bluris, Efer Makla Ugvina, the case of bluris, which is again the haircut case that we just spoke about just right now. Efer Makla, which is the use of ash in open wounds, which could leave a potential tattooing mark. And Gvina, cheese, which we'll discuss. Those are all the statements of Rav Malkia. Okay, so we're just giving away to remember which is Rav Malkio, which is Rav Malkia. Amra Papa, Masnisin umasnisa Rav Malkia. Our Papa gives another way. Mishnayis, right? Masnisa, Mishnayis and Braises are Rav Malkia. Shmaisisa, Amoraic statements, Rav Malkio. Okay, the Simonech, the rate to remember this is Masnisa Malkisa. Fine. My benai. What's practical difference here? Ikebenai or shvachas. Okay, so the nafkamina might be the case of the maid servants. When a wife brings in maid servants into a marriage, does she still have any additional domestic responsibilities? Fine. We'll say just understand. Once upon a time before Torah Shebichsav was written down, these type of mnemonics, these type of memory devices were incredibly important. Now, Baruch Hashem, we have the schos to mamish see everything on the page. Amud Beis, Mishnah. We both say now we come to an incredible sugya. Elu dvarim, all incredible sugyas. Elu dvarim shel ovdei kochavim asurim v'isurin iser hana. The following items of an ovdei kochavim are asur. You may not eat them, and furthermore, not only can you not eat them, but there's also an iser hana. You're also not allowed to get benefit. What are they? Number 1, yayin, the wine of an akum. Chometz, vinegar, v'chometz shalav ovdei kochavim shahaisim mitchilas yayin. Vinegar, but it's only vinegar that came from wine. In other words, the wine was owned by an akum, and then the wine became vinegar. You can't use that either. The cheres hydrini, hadrianic earthenware. Again, we're going to discuss what all of these items are. Oros livuvin. So this is very interesting. Rashi says over here, oros livuvin. Now, by the way, just so you understand, over here, we're going to see that when it comes to wine and vinegar, what's the issue? The issue is potential idolatrous libational purposes, right? Was this used for Avoda Zara? Literally, again, yayin nesach. Now, interestingly enough, vinegar was never used for libational purposes. But what's the concern? The concern is if the akum owned it when it was in its wine state, so then it may have been used for or designated for libational purposes. Then even when it turns to vinegar, it's still prohibited. Oros livuvin is very interesting. Look at Rashi, first short line in Rashi. Oros livuvin, shekori keneged alev, darkan lasas kin lavodas kochavim, umotzien es alev derech hanekev, umisyase mishum zivchei mesim. So I will say this is fascinating, that sometimes for idolatrous purposes, what they would do is like this. They would take a living animal, they would make a hole right by the heart, they would reach into the animal and pull out the heart from the living animal. Lahavdil, I think this was in Indiana Jones, right? I think it was Indiana Jones, but I didn't see it. I have a friend who saw it, right? Or second gear says, I watched it on the way to Eretz Yisrael. And anything you watch on the way to Eretz Yisrael is mutter, by the way. I just want to point out. That's an explicit heter. In any event, so they go ahead and they would literally pull a heart out of the animal. Oros livuvin. But I think Indiana Jones, he did it with people. No, not good. So Gemara says as follows. Okay, lahavdil. In any event, the Gemara says, actually, it's probably not lahavdil. It's actually this. So that's oral sibulin. So both sides. So again, what that's talking about over here is, let's say you wound up with the hide of that animal, right? You wound up with the hide of that animal. Ultimately, again, that's avodah zara. That's avodah zara, and ultimately, again, you cannot get benefit from that. Rabbi Shmuel says, "Bizman shakara shalo." Bizman shakara shalo agol aser moshach mutar. So there's an interesting way to tell the difference about this. In avodah zara, what they would do is they would make a circular opening on the hide, right, or on the animal opposite its heart, and they would pull it out from the circle. So if the opening on the hide is circular, you know that it was used for avodah zara. If it is what's the word? A slit, right? A slit, then that's not avodah zara. Not avodah zara. Good. Basra nichnas la'avodas kochav chav mutar. So meat that goes into oved kochavim is mutar. So right, talis kochavim is mutar. Vayotze aser v'meshek zid kemesim divrei Rabbi Akiva. But when it comes out, ultimately again it's aser because it has the status ultimately again of an offering. Now again, I both say we'll have to see exactly what that means. It's not immediately clear from the Mishnah what that's referring to. Next. Rabbi Akiva, I'm sorry, letarfos. So those who are going to worship their idolatry, right? So you're catching an akum when he's on his way to go ahead and he's traveling to his avodah zara. So what's the halacha? Asr laseis v'laseis imayin. So you can't do business with an akum when he's on his way to his avodah zara. So we'll say this is reminiscent already at the beginning of the parak. Why? What are we concerned about? Because if he does a business deal with me on his way to his idolatry, what's going to happen? He's going to give thanks to his idolatry when he gets there. On the other hand, v'habayin mutarin, when they come, if you catch an akum on the way back from his pilgrimage, then it's mutter to do business with him. Okay, incredible. Next, so we'll say no dos ha'obdei kochavim v'kan kehen. So ultimately, again, wineskins, jugs of an obed kochavim, v'yayin shel Yisrael kanus bahen. Now, this is very interesting. What happens if you have kosher wine that was kept inside of the wineskins or inside of the jugs of an akum? So that is going to be aser, right? That is going to be aser, the isurei and isur hana. So not only is it aser, but what? It's also an isur hana. You also can't get any benefits from it. Div Rabbi Meir. Now both say, this is very interesting because what's going on over here? This is now an absorption issue. It's an absorption issue. So I will say, so we're being introduced to a lot of things over here. So first of all, like the Mishnah begins by talking about the prohibition of getting benefits from the wine of an akum, right? And now ultimately it's even more. Utilizing his utensils to house my own wine is also going to be problematic because of what they call blias, absorptions. Absorptions that because the assumption is that there is akum wine absorbed into the skin, there's akum wine absorbed into the jug, and therefore when I go ahead and I put my kosher wine, right? I'm putting my kedem malaga in there. Nevertheless, again, that is still going to be aser because of the absorptions that come out. Incredible. The Chum say any certain isser hana. The Chum agree that you can drink the wine, but they hold that it is not an isser hana. Not an isser hana. Okay, next. V'achartzanim v'azagin sha'ovdei kochavim asurin. Further, I will say, so chartzanim and zagim, remember, what are chartzanim and zagim? Those are like the grape skins and the grape seeds. So this is talking about bepashtos, after an akum has made his wine. This is the residual, this is the leftover. You still can't get any benefits from these items. Asurin, v'isurin hanob div Rabbi Meir. Chum say no, lachin asurin, if they're moist, it's asur. Yeveshin mutar, if it's dried out, it's going to be mutar. Again, we'll see the scope of this. Hamurias. So we'll say murias. Rashi says, shemen shel dagim. This is the oil that comes out of fish. Ugvinas beis unaiki sha'obdei kochavim, or cheese that comes from beis unaiki. Again, we're going to define all of this in the Gemara. That belongs to idolaters. Asurin. Ultimately, again, it's aser. V'isurin isra hana. Meir says not only is it aser, but you also can't get benefit from it. The Chum say ein isurin isra hana. The Chum on the other hand say no, it's aser. You can't consume it, but halacha l'maisa, it is not an isra hana. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Shah Rabbi Shmuel Silber Rabbi Yeshua. So we'll say, actually, no, we're going to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meres Hashem with the rest of this sugi, the rest of this Mishnah tomorrow. Incredible. We'll say, this Mishnah is really going to open the door to a tremendous number of fascinating halachas. Tomorrow in the Mishnah, we'll pick up with the prohibition of cheese of an akum. Meres Hashem. We'll say, shkoyach. Right, Chevron, have a great day, everyone. Yes.
problem with being